boy and a girl are lost in the woods, alone in the woods at night. The wind it howls, an owl she hoots, and their feet become tangled in brambles and roots, and their hearts become tangled in fright. A boy and a girl fall asleep in the woods, under a bower of trees, and they dream of their home in their soft feather bed, and they dream of the stories their grandfather read, and they're soothed by a merciful breeze. A boy and a girl wake up in the woods, for the sun has come up without fail, and they'll find their way forward, or they'll find their way back, for they'll find all along their meandering track there are breadcrumbs along the trail. See, I think that's what stories are. Breadcrumbs along the trail, because I believe that our lives are like roads we walk along. And other people have walked along those roads before us, and other people will walk along those roads behind us, and everybody leaves a trail of their stories, like breadcrumbs that we can follow. We can follow them forward to see where people went. We can follow them backwards to see where people came from. We can follow them backwards along the lines of our families, stories of our families. I wonder if you have a grandparent, or maybe even a parent that came from a different country outside of the United States of America, or even a different state within the United States of America. It's a big country. Different states are almost like whole different countries. And then, have you ever asked that grandparent or that parent to tell you stories they heard when they were little? You should. You can learn so much about your culture from the stories that people tell their children. My grandparents all came from Russia. My grandfather was a big man. He was a big man. He had a big, deep voice like this. He had a Russian accent like this. I'm going to tell you a Russian story that my grandfather told me. I'm even going to use his voice. This is the story of the sparrow, which is a little bird like this, and the crow, which is a big bird like this. Little sparrow, all day long, flitters around from one place to another, having a little grain here, so good, having a little worm here, so good, with never a thought about tomorrow. Along comes the crow, sits up in the tree, says, "Hey, bird, how do you live with never a thought about tomorrow?" "It's simple," says the sparrow. "I just have a little grain here, so good. I have a little worm here, so good, and I survive. Why worry about tomorrow?" "Well, I'll tell you," says the crow. "What will happen if one of these little grains you love to eat so much should stick in your throat and choke you? "Oh," says the sparrow, "I would simply stick in my claw and scratch it out." "Aha," says the crow, "but what if with your claw you should cause your throat to bleed?" "Oh," said the sparrow, "then I would wade out into the river, I would drink some water, and I would wash the blood away." "Aha," says the crow, "but what if, as you are standing in the icy water of the river, you should catch a cold?" "Oh," said the sparrow, "then I would build a little fire, and I would warm myself." "Ah," says the crow, "but what if the fire should spread?" "Oh," said the sparrow, "then I would flap my wings very hard, I would make a wind, and I would blow the fire out." "Ah," says the crow, "but what if you should burn your wings?" "Oh," said the sparrow, "then I would fly to the doctor, and the doctor would cure me." "Ah," says the crow, "but what if the doctor is not at home?" "Oh," said the sparrow, then I would have a little grain here, so good. I would have a little worm here, so good. I would sit in my nest, the sun would warm me, the breeze would cool me, and I would heal myself. Why worry about tomorrow?" "Ah, silly bird," says the crow. "Only a fool never thinks about tomorrow." So, here's my question for you. Here we have a sparrow who believes that as long as you're doing the right thing at every one given moment of your life, your whole life's going to turn out right. Can't help but. But then you got the crow that says, "No way, you've got to make plans for the future. You got to take precautions against danger." So, who do you agree with? The sparrow or the crow? Taking it one day at a time, or making plans and taking precautions? Well, here's the thing. You've got the sparrow's way over here. You've got the crow's way over here. And you got about a billion cajillion ways in between and on both sides. Our job in life is to find our own way. Find our own path. Put our feet on it, one foot in front of the other. Stay true to our path and leave some breadcrumbs along the trail in case somebody wants to follow us. Now, what's the most famous story we know about breadcrumbs along the trail? Is it Hansel and Gretel? Oh, there's a good story. There's a good story. There's a story that has been told in different ways by different cultures from all over the world. Cultures that never had a chance to talk to each other, but they still tell the same story. A little bit different each time, but how does that happen? How does the same story come up in different places? Well, my job as a storyteller is to find all the different ways a story is told and then put them together in a way that makes that story my own. So I'm going to tell you the story of Hansel and Gretel the way I tell it. Once, not so long ago for people with long memories, in a place not so far away for people with long legs, there stood a beat-up old shack, much like the beat-up old shack I used to live in when I was a boy. But whereas the beat-up old shack I lived in was in a city, this beat-up old shack stood at the edge of a wide woods, which was a good thing because the man who lived in this beat-up old shack was a woodsman, meaning that he chopped wood and he sold it for a living. And he lived there with his wife and his two children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. And they were always very poor. And there came a time when a famine spread throughout the land. Now, a famine is a time when the rains don't fall and the crops don't grow. And these are hard times. And hard times will bring out the best in some people and bring out the worst in others. And these hard times did bring out the best in Hansel and Gretel, because during these hard times, Hansel and Gretel realized they had to stand by each other. They had to be there for each other. And they did. They were. And they came to love each other very dearly and become very, very close. But these hard times did not bring out the best in their parents. But you got to think about it. Think about it for just a second. If you were a parent and you worked hard every day, and no matter how hard you worked, you couldn't make enough money to put a good meal on the table for your children, would you start to feel kind of bad about yourself? And you know, when we feel bad about ourselves, sometimes we will say things that we don't mean. Have you ever done that? Have you ever said something and right after you said it, you went, "Oh boy, I shouldn't have said that"? Well, that's happened to the best of us. But that's what happened one night when Hansel and Gretel were getting ready to go to sleep in their loft above the kitchen. They heard their parents talking, and they heard their father say, "Oh, wife, how can we feed our children when we can't even feed ourselves?" And they heard their mother say, "Well, we can't, and that's the truth of it. We should just take the children out into the woods and leave them there." Well, Hansel and Gretel were so upset hearing their parents say such a thing that they pulled their heavy covers up over their heads so they couldn't hear any more. They didn't hear their father say, "Oh, wife, how can you say such a thing? Take our children out into the woods and leave them there to be eaten by wild beasts." And they didn't hear their mother say, "Oh, I know, I didn't really mean it, but I'm so upset I don't know what to do." And they went on worrying into the night. And to Hansel and Gretel, under their covers, where they could hear the tone of their parents' voices, but not the actual words, it sounded to them like their parents were arguing, maybe arguing about them. And Hansel said, Gretel, it's hunger that has made our parents say such things. It's hunger that has made our parents say that they would take us out into the woods and leave us there to be eaten by wild beasts. And Gretel said, you're right, Hansel. You know, they're old and we're young. They've spent our whole lives taking care of us. Maybe it's time we took care of ourselves. And Hansel said, you're right, Gretel. So this is what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, before the sun comes up, before our parents wake, we're both going to sneak downstairs. We're each going to take one slice of bread apiece, and we're going to go off into the woods to see if we can make a life for ourselves. And that's what they did. First thing the next morning, before the sun came up, before their parents woke, they both snuck downstairs. They each took one slice of bread apiece. Gretel put hers in her apron pocket. Hansel put his in his pants pocket. And they went off into the woods to see if they could make a life for themselves. And as they went, a white dove, a little white bird, perched on the roof of their cottage and watched them go. And I think that dove was smiling. Well, Hansel and Gretel were deep in the woods by the time their parents woke up, and when their father went upstairs to wake them and found their bed empty and unmade and looked around and found nowhere around, he knew exactly what had happened, and he said, "Oh, wife, Hansel and Gretel must have heard us worrying last night and now have gone off into the woods to see if they can make a life for themselves." And his wife said, "Better. If we were younger and stronger, we too should leave here and make a new life for ourselves." And he said, "Oh, but wife, in the woods they'll be eaten by wild beasts." And she said, Better to die quickly in the jaws of a beast than to stay here and die slowly of hunger." And he said, "Oh, but wife, there are things in those woods more terrible than wild beasts. I know, I've worked there all my life. I must go find them." And she said, "Oh, foolish man, you'll never find them now." And he said, "Oh, yes, I shall, for look." And sure enough, though Hansel didn't know, he had a hole in the pocket where he'd put that slice of bread. And crumbs from that slice had dropped down his pants leg and marked the trail he'd taken. And that trail his father followed. Now, meantime, Hansel and Gretel had gotten hopelessly lost in the woods. They'd made so many twists, so many turns, gone over so many little hills, gone around so many big trees. They didn't know which way was north, which way was south, which way was right, which way was left, which way was up, which way was down. They were lost, and they were scared. Now, tell me what you think. At this point, scared as they were, if they noticed those breadcrumbs leading them back home, you think they might have turned around and gone back? Well, they might have. They might have. But I'll tell you something. If you ever decide to do something and you make that decision with all of your heart and all of your mind put together, you won't turn back no matter how tough the going gets. And anyway, they went on deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods, and deeper into the woods they went. And as they went, they began to hear the cooing of a dove above their heads. It sounded like this: "Coo-roo, coo-roo, coo-ree, coo-ree, coo-roo, coo-roo, coo-ree." And as they continued into the woods, that cooing of the dove began to sound like a song to them. It started to sound like this: "Coo-roo, coo-roo, I'm following you. Coo-ree, coo-ree, you should follow me." And they looked up, and the flight of the dove was so graceful, and its color was so pure and white, and its song was so sweet that they couldn't help but follow, and follow they did, deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods, and deeper into the woods they went, and they had to go faster because they were afraid the dove would fly on and leave them behind. As deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods they went. They became tired, but they would not stop to rest because they were afraid if they stopped, the dove would fly on and leave them behind. As deeper and deeper into the woods they went. They became hungry, but they would not stop to eat because they were afraid if they stopped, the dove would fly on and leave them behind. As deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods they went. And then night began to fall. And as the shadows crept into the woods, it seemed to the children as if the trees pushed their roots up into the trail to trip them as they went. It seemed that the trees reached out their branches to tear the children's clothes and scratch their faces as deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkening woods they went. And now they could not hear the cooing of the dove at all anymore. And they knew that they were lost. They knew that they were lost when suddenly they came upon a clearing. And the last light of sunset still filtered down through the trees, soft reds, light pinks, oranges, yellows, light blues. And there, in the center of the clearing, stood a cottage. Oh, the most marvelous little house the children could even have imagined, for it was all made out of dried fruits and nuts and cakes and cookies and candies. And there, perched on the roof of the cottage, was that white dove. And I think that dove was smiling. Well, Hansel and Gretel were so hungry by this time that they didn't stop to think that there might be somebody living in that house who wouldn't want their house eaten. They didn't even stop to think about what parts of that house might be healthy for them and what parts might not be. No, they just went right up to the front part of that house and they started breaking off pieces to eat. And as they did, the white dove flew down from the roof of the cottage, landed on the trail behind them, and began picking up and swallowing the breadcrumbs along the trail. Well, Hansel on the front porch of the house, he broke off a big piece of gingerbread roof for himself. He broke out a piece of spun sugar window for Gretel. I know you don't eat sugar yourself, but hey, these kids never got a chance to, so we're going to let them. And they just ate. And then from inside the house, the sweetest old grandmotherly type voice sang out to them like this. Nibbling, nibbling like a mouse, who is eating up my house? And Hansel said with his mouth all full of gingerbread, he said, it's the wind in the trees, it's the birds in the hive. Don't worry, old woman, your house will survive. And then out of the house came the sweetest old grandmotherly type woman the children had ever seen. Oh, she was old. She had to walk with two canes, and her hair was white, and it was kind of tangled up with some twigs in it and some spider webs and some bugs walking around in it. But hey, she's an old woman. She lives in the woods. She doesn't get a lot of visitors. She's not going to brush her hair 100 times every morning like the girls you know do. She had these big ears with hair growing out of them, and this big nose that came like this with a wart on it right there, almost touched her chin that came up to it like that. But have you ever noticed how sometimes it seems like old people, their ears and their noses just kept growing after their faces stopped? You ever notice that? And when she smiled, her teeth were kind of yellowy and pointy. Hey, but she was smiling and she said, "Oh, children, 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 how hungry you must be to eat a house. Come inside, and I'll fix you a good meal of stewed meats and sautéed vegetables and dessert." And Hansel and Gretel came inside and sat down to the most delicious meal they'd ever had in their whole lives. And after they finished eating, they yawned. Oh. And the old woman said, "Oh, children, how tired you must be after your journey. Lie down in these soft feather beds and rest yourselves." And as Hansel and Gretel slipped into deep, dreamless sleep, their father met that dove along the trail. And that dove pecked up one last breadcrumb, swallowed it, spread its wings, and flew up and innocently away, leaving their father with no trail to follow, leaving their father to wander aimlessly for days afterwards, calling, "Hansel! Gretel! Hansel! Gretel!" until his voice was hoarse, and his feet were sore, and his back was tired, and with an aching heart, he had to return to his wife, and neither one of them had much appetite for that little bit of extra bread that was theirs now that their children were gone. Meanwhile, back in the cottage in the woods, the old woman watched over the children as they slept. And as she watched, she wrung her hands together like this. And she chuckled under her breath like this. Because she wasn't a nice old grandmotherly type woman, was she? No, she was a witch. A mean, nasty old witch who tempted children into her house with her cookies and candies, good cooking, and then she would throw them in cages and feed them until they became plump and juicy. And then she would throw them in her oven and she would cook them up and she would eat them. Oh, that's disgusting. But that's what she meant to do. And the first thing next morning, before the children had a chance to wake up themselves, she grabbed Hansel, drug him out of bed, drug him out into the backyard, threw him in a cage, locked the cage, and hung the key around her neck. Then she went back inside and shook Gretel awake, and she wasn't talking like a nice grandmotherly type woman now. No, she wasn't. She said, "Wake up, you sleepy bones. There'll be no lazing around my house. No, you will work for me. You will scour my pots, yes. And you will sweep my floors, yes. And you will mend my clothes, yes. And most important of all, you will feed your brother, so that he will become plump, yes. And juicy, so that I can cook him up, and eat him. Well, Gretel was scared. She wanted to run away, and she could have. She was young, she was quick, the old woman was old and slow, but Gretel didn't run away, did she? And you know why she didn't run away, don't you? Because of those hard times that Hansel and Gretel had already spent together, where they realized they had to stand by each other. And so she stayed, and she did scour those pots, and she did sweep those floors, and she did mend those clothes, and she did feed her brother, and he did eat. He couldn't help but eat. It had been such a long time since he'd had good food to eat, and as he ate, he did begin to become plump and juicy. But Gretel had noticed early on that the old woman couldn't see very well. And so after one of Hansel's very first meals, she told him to save the chicken bone from his dinner. And every morning when the old woman would come out to his cage and say, "Stick your fingers through the bars and let me see how plump you are," Hansel would stick that chicken bone out through the bars. And the old woman would feel that chicken bone and she'd think, "How does that boy eat so much and stay so thin?" Well, this went on for several weeks, and Gretel had been eating her share of the food as well, and so Gretel had begun to, put on a couple pounds. And one morning, the old woman, in her nicest grandmotherly type voice, came to Gretel, put her arms around her, and said, "Gretel, dear, start the fire in the oven, please." Now, Gretel was suspicious right off the bat because the old woman never spoke to her nicely anymore, but what could she do? She started the fire in the oven. After a little while, the old woman said, "Gretel, dear, check to see if the oven's ready, please." Okay, Gretel knew what was going on. She had to think of something. She had to stall. Okay, she said, "How do I check to see if the oven's ready, old grandmother?" And the old woman said, "Well, just stick your head in, dearie, and see." Oh, Gretel knew. Yes, she had to do something. She had to think. She said, "How much of my head do I have to stick in the oven to see if it's ready?" And the old woman said, "Well, the whole thing, dearie, down to your shoulders." And Gretel's, she's thinking. She says, I think my big old head's too big for that little old oven." And the old woman's starting to lose her nice grandmotherly type voice, and she started to lose her patience. Said, "No, it's not. My head's bigger than yours, and my head would fit in there." And Gretel said, I can tell I'm upsetting you, old grandmother, but Could you show me? And the old woman said, "Oh, well, I suppose so, if I must." And she opened the oven door, and she was about to stick her head in when Gretel said, "Wait!" You think Gretel had a change of heart? No. She said, "That key hanging around your neck, it might get hot and burn you. Maybe I should hold it for you." And the old woman said, "Oh, all right, here." And she stuck her head in the oven, and Gretel gave her a push that sent her all the way inside. She slammed the oven door. She locked it. She went outside. She unlocked that cage. Hansel flew out like a bird set free into her arms, and they hugged like they'd never stop. And then Hansel and Gretel decided what they needed to do was to tear down that house so it wouldn't tempt any more unsuspecting children into it. And they did. They tore down the roof, and they tore up the walls, and they tore up the floor, and under the floor they found gold, silver, jewels, treasure beyond their wildest dreams. And they stuffed as much as they could in their pockets and then thought, we could take this back to our parents. We could help our parents. And immediately they took off through the woods to see if they could find their way back home. Now, as they were going through the woods, they came to a wide, swiftly running river. Wait a second. Did they have to cross a river on their way to the witch's house? No, but I'll tell you something. Sometimes you have to take a different road back to a place than you took to get away from it. And that's the truth. And as they stood at the edge of that river, Hansel said, "Gretel, this river is running too fast for us to swim across." And Gretel said, "I know, Hansel, and I don't see a bridge in either direction." And Hansel said, "No bridge. I don't even see any stones we can jump across." And then Gretel saw a white duck swimming on the river. And she said, "Hansel, maybe that white duck could carry us across." And Hansel said, wait a minute. I'm not trusting any more white birds, okay? It was a white bird who led us to the house of the witch. And Gretel said, "You're right, Hansel. It was a white bird who led us to the treasure." So she called, "Little duck who goes quack, quack, carry us upon your back." And the duck swam over to the edge of the river. Gretel climbed on its back. Hansel went to climb on behind, and Gretel said, "Hansel, this duck isn't going to be able to carry both of us at the same time." And Hansel said, "But Gretel, we've come so far together. I don't think I could take a step on my own." And Gretel said, "Hansel, if we've come so far together, maybe it's time we each took a step on our own." So Hansel waited as the duck carried Gretel across the river, came back, got him, carried him across the river, and they went on through the woods until the woods became less dense, less trees, more light, until they came to the very edge of the woods. And there they saw, at the very edge of the woods, that beat-up old shack. Looked like a mansion to them after being away so long, and standing out in front with their father and mother with their eyes all dry and red from all the tears they'd shed. And they saw each other across the clearing, and they ran to each other with outstretched arms and flew into each other's arms and hugged like they'd never stop. And then Hansel and Gretel showed their parents the gold, the silver, the treasures they'd brought back. And the four of them together took some big bags and wheelbarrows, went back into the woods, gathered up the rest of that treasure, and brought it back and shared it with all the people of the countryside. And then, do you know what happened? The rains began to fall again, and the crops began to grow again, now that the evil was gone from the land. And people were able to live again, as happily as they could, for as long as they could thereafter. And that's the story of Hansel and Gretel, the way I tell it. So I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. And you're going to say, "Oh, that's a nice job if you can get it. All you have to do is tell stories." But no, I work pretty hard. I do. I mean, first of all, I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of traveling to find the stories and to tell the stories. I do a lot of writing. It's like homework, you know. And I work at it. And I can't I can't make quite enough money as a storyteller to feed my family. So I've also got to go out and get other jobs, and I work at them too. I work hard. I work all the time. I work and I just don't seem to have so much to show for it. You know what I say to myself over and over again? I'll tell you what I say to myself. I say these words over and over again. I say, when will I get my reward? You ever feel like that? It would make me feel so much better if you could just even pretend that you felt like that. If you could say those words with me, just say those words with me. When will I get my reward? Let's say it like we're angry. When will I get my reward? Let's say it like we're sad. When will I get my reward? Well, this is a story about a man who felt just like that. It's a story from the Ukraine, and it's called The Ballad of the Simple Man. Once upon a time, there was a simple man who worked hard all his life, working all day long, every day, never stopping. Or every once in a while he'd stop and wipe the sweat off his brow, and then he'd go back to work again, working. And every once in a while he'd stop and he'd say, when will I get my reward? And then he'd go back to work again, working day in and day out until one day he stopped. He took that tool, he threw it down on the ground. He jumped on it, he broke it into 1,000 pieces because for the first time in his simple life, he had an idea. And that idea was, I'm going to go and find the wise man on the hill. And I'm going to ask the wise man, when will I get my reward? And immediately he set off through town and out of town to find that wise man on the hill. Now, first he had to go through the woods. And as he got to the woods, it was dark and it was scary in the woods. And as he came around one big tree, he heard, oh, 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 oh! It was the hungry wolf. And the wolf said, brother man, where are you going so quickly, brother man? And the simple man said, well, I'm going to find the wise man on the hill to find out when I'm going to get my reward. And the wolf said, the wise man on the hill? You're going to find the wise man on the hill? Yeah, you know, I was about to make a meal out of you. But now that I see here that you're going to find the wise man on the hill, would you ask the wise man a question for me? So the man said, yeah, sure. Anything you want, yeah. And the wolf said, good answer. Ask the wise man this. Why, if the wolf has to live in the woods, why there's not enough food for the wolf in the woods? I'll make this simple for you. Ask the wise man how long I'm going to be hungry. You got that? And the simple man said, yeah, I got that. Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. See you later. And he went off to find the wise man on the hill. Now, when he left the woods, he started traveling across the wide open plains, and it was hot, and the sun beat down on him, and he was thirsty, and he was tired, and he saw a tree which had a stream running by it. And he thought maybe he could sit down under that tree, get some shade, and drink some water. And so he sat down there, but the water was tasty as he drank it, but the tree didn't offer much shade because its branches were thin and its leaves were few. And so he was about to leave when the tree said, brother man, where are you going so quickly, brother man? And he said, well, I'm going to the wise man on the hill to see if I can find my reward. And the tree said, oh, would you ask the wise man a question for me? And the simple man said, yeah, I guess so, sure. And the tree says, well, here you see this stream runs by, yet my branches are withered, and my leaves, they die. Ask the wise man why I'm dying. And the simple man said, okay, I'll do that for you. Sure enough, bye. And he went on towards the hill to find the wise man. Now, as he came to the fertile valleys nestled in the foothills, in one particularly fertile valley, he came upon a little cottage. Oh, a lovely little cottage with a thatched roof made of straw and stucco walls that were painted a bright yellow and a bright blue door and bright blue shutters on the windows and a little blue window box with pretty flowers growing out of it and a lovely garden with a stone path leading straight to a white picket fence and it was just the kind of house that the simple man might want to settle down in if he ever got his reward, don't you think? And standing at that picket fence, there was a fair maiden. And she said, brother man, where are you going so quickly, brother man? And he said, well, I'm going to the wise man on the hill to find out when I'm going to get my reward. And she said, oh, that's wonderful. Oh, would you ask the wise man a question for moi? And he said, sure, I could do that. I could do that. What's your question? And she said, well, you see, I have this lovely house. I have this lovely yard. I'm a lovely person. I have a good education, a nice personality, a good sense of humor, and I make all my own clothes. And yet, I have no one to share this with. Ask the wise man how long I'm going to be lonely. And he said, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll ask the wise man for you. Bye. And he went up that hill to find the wise man on the hill. Now, as he reached the top of the hill, he began to hear E equals MC squared. The square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sums of the squares of the two opposing sides. Fools rush in where wise men fear to tread. Hey there, you looking for me? You know who I am, don't you? I'm the wise man, and you have come here to ask me a question. I know that because I'm wise. Tell me, what is your question, please? And the simple man said, okay, all right, here it is. When will I get my reward? And the wise man said, well, you know, I've been watching you up on top of my hill here, watching how hard you work, and you deserve a reward. And I'm going to give you one. I'm going to give you the gift of luck. The gift of luck. All you've got to do is go out into the world and find it. And the simple man said, oh, thank you very much. I'm off right now. And the wise man said, hold on a second there now, boy. Now, you're trying to tell me that you made it all the way from where you started all the way up to the top of the hill here and nobody asked you any questions to ask me? And the simple man said, oh, I'm sorry. Whoops. I got so excited there for a second that I didn't have to. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. There was this wolf who is living in the woods, and he wanted me to ask you how long he's going to be hungry. And then there was this tree, and it was by a stream, but it was still dying, and it wanted me to ask you why it's dying. And then there's this fair maiden at the bottom of the hill, and she's very nice, but she's lonely, and she wants to know how long she's going to be lonely. And the wise man said, well, I got the answer to those questions too, and I'm going to whisper them right in your ear. And the wise man whispered the answers into the ear of the simple man. And then he said, now, go on out there and find that gift of luck. And the simple man went back on down the hill. And the first person he met when he came down the bottom of the hill was that fair maiden. And she said, brother man, did you find the wise man on the hill? And he said, yes, I did. And he gave me the gift of luck, and I'm off to find it. And she said, oh, that's just wonderful. And what did the wise man say about moi? And he said, whoa, well, the wise man said that a guy was going to come along, about my height, about my build, wearing a purple shirt and bright suspenders. And then he said, the two of you were going to fall in love and get married. And she said, it's you. It's you. And he said, no, it's not me. It can't be me. I got the gift of luck. I've got to go find it. And she said, but don't you see? I'm a good person and you're a good person. And I'm sure if we got to know each other, we could live happily ever after. And he said, "Hey, look it, you're fine, you're good, but I tell you, I'm a pretty average sized guy, and purple is a wonderful color. Lots of people wear purple and bright suspenders, and I've got to go because I've got to find that gift of luck." And he left that fair maiden lonely. Now, he was so excited about that gift of luck that he wasn't even going to stop to drink water by that tree. But the tree called out to him and said, brother man, did you find the wise man on the hill? And he said, yes, I did. And he gave me the gift of luck, and I'm off to find it. And the tree said, but what did the wise man say about me? And he said, oh, yeah, right, about you. The wise man said that there's a big chest of gold that's buried between your trunk and the stream, and that's why the water's not getting to your roots, and that's why you're dying. And the tree said, dig it up. And he said, I would, but I really don't have time right now. I've got the gift of luck, and I've got to go find it. And the tree said, but don't you see? If you dig it up, you'll be rich, and I'll live. And he said, you know what you got to do? You got to tell that to the next guy that comes along. He'll need the money. I don't need the money. I've got the gift of luck. And he left that tree dying. Now, by the time he got back to the woods, that wolf was almost dead with hunger. And the wolf said, brother man, did you find the wise man on the hill? The simple man said, yes, I did. And he gave me the gift of luck, and I'm off to find it. And the wolf said, yeah, but what did the wise man say about me? And the simple man said, you know something? You've got a problem. And your problem is that you think you're the only one with problems, and you're not. I mean, there was a tree that was dying of thirst, and thirst can be worse than hunger, because it had a chest of gold between its trunk and the stream it was by, and the water was, and they wanted me to dig up that trunk, but of course I didn't, because I got the gift of luck and I got to go find it. And the wolf said, but what did the wise man say about me? And he said, well, there you go again, me, that's all you think about. I mean, there was a fair maiden who was lonely, and loneliness can be worse than hunger. And she wanted to get together with me because the wise man said a guy was going to come along and not like me. But of course, I didn't stick around because I got the gift of luck and I got to go find it. And the wolf said, but what did the wise man say about me? And the simple man said, okay, all right, fine, I'll tell you. But I really didn't understand this one because the wise man said that you're always going to be hungry. And the wolf said, no, no, Until, yeah, a man comes along, yeah, who is so simple, yeah, and so foolish, yeah. And then he said, you were never going to be hungry again. I didn't quite understand that one. And the wolf said, okay, let me get this straight. Tree, chest of gold, you don't dig it up because you got the gift of luck. Mm-hmm, that's right. Mm-hmm. And fair maiden, nice girl. Yeah, she seemed to be. A good sense of humor. I think so. I think she had. Yeah, because a good sense of humor is important in a relationship. Yeah, I think she had a good sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And you didn't want to stick around with her because you got the gift of luck. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd say that you are probably the simplest. Yeah, pretty simple, most foolish man I've ever met. Yeah, pretty foolish, pretty foolish, that's me. And I think that my luck has changed. And the wolf ate the simple man and lived happily ever after. Which is to say that you got to keep an eye out for those breadcrumbs along the trail, any one of which could be an opportunity, and you never want to let an opportunity pass you by as you walk along your road in life. And as you go, don't forget to leave some breadcrumbs along the trail.